Welcome, good thinkers, to Good Thinking Live. This is the mostly weekly show where we steal a little bit of time away from all the time we are told what to think so we can devote just a little bit of time to improving how we think. So, for those of you regular good thinkers from around the world, please let us know where you are from and who you are because you are in for an incredible treat. For those of you new to the show, please let us know who you are and where you're from. And I am going to bring into the good thinking conversation our guest and persuasion and influence expert and my friend, Brian Ahearn. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Becky, it's great to be with you.
Great to have you here. Can I brag on you for a few minutes or not few minutes? I'll brag on you for a short little period of time.
That would be great. I hope my wife listens to this.
Okay, so Jane, listen up because Brian is a world class expert on the art, but more importantly, the science of persuasion and influence, and particularly ethical persuasion. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Brian is the Chief Influence Officer at Influence People. He's the author of Influence People. And I love this because people is an acronym. And let me see if I can remember this. This is powerful, everyday opportunities to persuade that are lasting and ethical. How did I do?
Bingo,
All right.
100%.
Yay. Okay, so Brian's also an international speaker. He is a LinkedIn learning instructor. We're fellow LinkedIn learning instructors. He is a trainer, a consultant, a coach, and he is one of very few people in the world who are certified by Bob Cialdini, the father of influence and the father of persuasion, to teach and train on these methods. And also a black belt and a bit of a gym rat and a fellow Scotch lover.
Love
Did
it.
I miss anything? Did I miss anything?
No, that's plenty.
Okay, that's plenty. Okay, I want to do one more. He's also the author of the soon to launch book, Persuasive Selling for Relationship Driven Insurance Agents. And you think to yourself, I'm not an insurance agent, but let's take a break because I want to say one thing, welcoming people to the show. So Jancy, good morning. She's from somewhere where there's sunshine. I think she might be from LinkedIn Learning's headquarters. Jancy is my oldest friend in the world. Getting the hang of it. I love it. So let us know where you're from and who you are in the chat. Remember, this is going to be a really engaging, you guys, questions, because by the end of this good thinking episode, if you ever need to persuade anyone of anything, as long as you're doing it ethically, you're going to come away with so many things where you're like, I can't believe I didn't know this. And also, if you are not an insurance agent, Brian, why would someone who's not an insurance agent need to know about, persuading in an ethical relationship? I mean, how does that work for those of us not in insurance?
Well, the company I used to work for, we had a slogan, everybody sells. And we are. Every day, every one of us is selling. We may not be selling a product or service, but we are absolutely selling ourselves and our ideas. And if we understand how other people think and behave, and we learn what the science says about influence, we can have a whole lot more success getting those other people to say yes to us.
All right, fantastic. So that means that if you are here and you want to put something in the chat that says, okay, I need help persuading this, or maybe it's someone with whom you have a relationship. I don't know, your partner, your boss, your potential employer that you've been trying to talk to over a period of time. Put in the chat what you need help with. Maybe we can even take an example straight out and Brian can tell you exactly what to do. I mean, that would be incredible. Jennifer's here. Yay. Jennifer Felberg says, hi, Brian.
Hi, Jennifer, my favorite co-host in the world.
And Santiago, I got to give him cred because Santiago from Ecuador and Gabriel from Shakespeare's hometown and Stephen from the ancestral home. Who else do we have? Did I miss anyone? Sometimes the scroll goes so fast that I cannot get to all of you, but we're going to try. So please let us know what questions do you have? And, all of that's good stuff. Let us know where you are from. All right, Brian,
Yes.
when people think about influence and persuasion,
Mhm.
how should they think about it relative to manipulation?
Good question. Uh, I think you know, Becky, but your listeners probably don't know that if it weren't for the word manipulation, I would not be sitting here. I probably wouldn't know you. The course of my life and career would be entirely different. Because when I first came in contact with Robert Cialdini, he was very clear about non-manipulative ways to move people to action. It was a Stanford video where I saw him present, and I signed up for Stanford's marketing. They had wonderful materials, but one day one of their advertisements came across my desk at work, and it said in bold letters, call it influence, persuasion, or even manipulation. And the moral part of me said, this isn't right. I emailed Stanford. I never heard from them, but Robert Cialdini's office contacted me as a result of that email and said, thank you. Stanford's changing the marketing of all of our materials because of the email you sent them. And that was the beginning of my relationship with him. Now, that doesn't really answer your question, but I will just say this: is when it comes to ethically influencing people, we need to be truthful about what we're saying. We need to utilize the psychology that is natural to the situation we find ourselves in. And whatever we're trying to get that other person to do has to be good for them, not just good for us. This is not a one-sided relationship.
All right, I'm going to bring the first question in because I think it's good. With all of the principles of persuasion, you're so good at taking this science and really making it applicable. And that's what I like, because it's not about what to think. It's really about how to think. So we have the first question, and I think it would be a good way to start. And that first question is from Jennifer. How do I convince a company to connect and partner with a lesser known and trusted company?
So, Jennifer, trust is hugely important. And there may be things that you could do to bring out your trustworthiness, so that somebody looks at you and says, hey, this lady, Jennifer, she knows what she's talking about. She's not just somebody who we know nothing about. And so you don't have to be overt in this, but I always tell people in very casual ways, if I was talking to you, Jennifer, and I said, Jennifer, I've been doing this now for more than 30 years. And something that I found really works well, by just dropping that little tidbit about how long I've been doing something, that begins to impact your thinking. And then there are other opportunities that I have to get my expertise, so to speak, in front of you. So those are the things that you need to look for. Somebody is going to view you as a potentially trusted partner if they think that you have expertise, and if they also can look at other people or organizations that you've worked with. So those are two things that you really need to focus on getting out in front of you, so that person says, I'm willing to take her call, or maybe I won't take somebody else's.
How would you tie that in to the principles of persuasion? So by the end of this conversation, people have the labels to put to the behaviors.
Okay. Well, one of the principles that we talk about is authority. We're more willing to say yes to somebody that we look at and we say, that person really has a lot of wisdom or a lot of expertise. But if they don't know about your wisdom or your expertise, then you're just another individual with an opinion. And so it's incumbent upon us to always make sure that we get that in front. It does no good if somebody knows after the fact. So that's what I was referring to when I said that Jennifer needs to let them know that she is somebody who has expertise in her field. If those people know that beforehand, it will impact their thinking and their behavior. And the other one is what we call social proof or consensus. When an organization can look at somebody like Jennifer and say, wow, she's dealt with a lot of other organizations, or she's dealt with organizations that are very similar to ours, that gives her, again, some street cred to get them thinking that, she potentially could help us too.
All right. What do you do when you don't have a lot of expertise? You're new. Maybe you're a new real estate agent or a new insurance agent, or you're new to the company, or you are a new company. What's a tip or trick that we can use to highlight authority, or even would you still be highlighting social proof?
There may be some social proof. You may not have a lot of experience, but you may have already garnered some clients who you're working with that could start to show that. But another way, whenever you have a shortcoming in your product, your service, yourself, the strategy is always to admit that relatively early. You don't want somebody to get far down the path and then say, oh, hey, Becky, by the way, how long have you been doing this? And you go, oh, I just started last week. And that just kills the deal. So if you admit that potential weakness early on and segue with a word like but or however, people tend to forget what comes before but. I've been married for almost 33 years. I know when Jane says, Brian, I love you, but I forget the I love you, and I know the hammer's coming, and I focus on what comes next. And so we tend to focus on what comes after the but. So admit that weakness, but be ready to transition into things that you believe are strengths so that people get focused on that. And I will give one example that when you're newer at something, sometimes you put in a lot more effort. You leave no stone unturned. You give more effort. When somebody's a newer client, you can give them more tender loving care. So there are things that can be beneficial if you're newer to a particular role.
So you're suggesting that you essentially get to the fact that you are new to this before they ask you, not in response to them asking you.
Exactly, because you never want them to perceive that you were hiding that or hoping that they weren't going to ask. You know, a great example used to be the Avis commercials. They were not the number one car rental place. Avis was. And so their motto was, we're number two, but we try harder. And so they didn't have to say, come with us, we're the biggest and the best. We're not. But that means we're going to try even harder for you.
All right. So if you guys in the chat, let me ask you this. You ready? If you had a choice, you're either A, going to learn the art of persuasion, or B, learn the art of manipulation, not because you're a bad person, because you want to make sure it doesn't happen to you, what would you be? Or maybe C, you want to manipulate. I shouldn't assume, but you're good thinkers. You're not going to want to manipulate. You're going to want to avoid manipulation and engage in ethical persuasion. Would you want to learn the art of manipulation, B, sorry, or the art of persuasion, A? Let us know in the chat. And you're going to see why in a few minutes, because it's really going to help you differentiate. Now, as you think about these things, Brian, what do you think is the most important takeaway of all the principles for starting a conversation? What is the first thing that you should do when beginning the art of persuasion, whether it's with someone with whom you have a relationship or someone new?
I think what's been a revelation for me over time after I began to learn about these principles was how important the principle of liking is, but not so much about me getting you, Becky, or me getting any of the people who are with us today, getting them to like me. It's all about me coming to like you. And the same psychology that would make you like me will make me like you. So for example, if we find out we have something in common, you know, if we didn't know each other from Adam, but we suddenly found out we're both LinkedIn learning instructors and we're like, oh my gosh, that is so cool. Yes, you will naturally like me more, but I will come to like you more. And so I always encourage people, go into situations with the thought of, I want to like the people that I'm interacting with. And if you really start tapping into the psychology and truly start liking them, people can sense that. And when they really start to believe like, hey, that guy really likes me, they become so much more open to whatever you want to do, whatever you want to talk about. But I think it helps remove manipulation too, because I would never manipulate my friends. I know you wouldn't, Becky, and I don't think any of the people who are watching this today would ever manipulate their friends. So let's make it our goal to become friends with the people that we interact with.
All right. I think that is fantastic, but it leads to another question. First of all, I want to let you know that Joanna says she wants to know about persuasion. Stephen says he wants to know about persuasion. Mariana says persuasion. Daenerys says persuasion. So I think everyone here is more interested in thinking about how they can benefit themselves versus being like, prevent themselves from being manipulated. Next question, you guys, and I want to know if, and Brian, if there's a right or wrong answer. If you had a choice between knowing exactly how to make people like you or A, getting people to like you, or finding a way to like other people. Just you could find a way where you could always just like other people.
Mhm.
Which would you choose? A, finding a way to get people to like you, B, finding a way to like other people. Put it in the chat. And if you want to take the next step, which do you think is a more powerful persuasive technique? And they'll put it, there's a little lag, so we'll put it in the chat and
Okay.
you can reveal the answer. Is there a right answer to this?
I believe there is.
Okay. All right. What is it? What is the right answer? What is more effective not what's easier, that's not really it. What's a more effective persuasive technique?
You want me to answer that
You,
now? Because they've
you.
already, okay.
Yeah, because
Well,
they're going to put it in the chat. We'll see if they got it right. And those of you who get it right, since you're already going to be doing it, there'll be a lag. Rubber chickens. We know about rubber chickens. They're a little goofy, but good thinkers know rubber chickens matter. Okay.
So I would say that the answer is to come to like the other person. And I think the importance of that is that's what removes manipulation from the equation. Going back to, I would never manipulate my friends. I don't think any of you would. But if everybody just naturally liked you, it might be tempting to just keep asking for whatever it is that what you want. But when I come to like you, I start to really focus on what's best for you.
That is great. All right. We have got some rubber chicken winners. Mariana, Jancy, Joanna all said B. Finding a way to get others to like you. And I know you have some techniques in your books about this that are very specific. So whether you're picking up your new book for relationship persuasion or your first book with general persuasion or Brian's newsletter, which is fantastic, we'll let you know how you can get that as well. You'll have techniques to find ways to like other people, which sometimes is difficult. Stephen has a question. I think this is a good one before we get into some of the next steps after liking. And that is, does persuading people successfully require the gift of gab or lots of charisma, or can anyone learn how to do it?
Great question, Stephen. Anyone can learn to do it, because wherever you are on the spectrum of being good when it comes to persuasion, we can all get better. But I don't think that it relies on that gift of gab. In fact, working with salespeople, you hear that a lot, like, oh, he or she'll be a great salesperson because they have the gift of gab. The reality is good salespeople only talk about 25, maybe 30% of the time, because they know the right questions to ask. They know the value in allowing the client to feel like they're in control of that situation. They know all the things that they can learn about their needs, what they can connect on in liking, or how they can give genuine gifts through reciprocity. So you don't have to have that gift of gab. I think what people, I've seen, at least in my experience, what people tend to respond to the most is authenticity. That when they truly believe that you care about them, when they think that you're a truthful person, that when you give, it's not to get it, but it's because you really were thinking about them and thought this would benefit them. That's what people, I find, respond to the most.
Are people good at really determining authenticity? Or can people convince people that they're authentic in a way that might be beneficial as the influencer?
Yes. I mean, people can always do that. People can always use, for example, flattery to get you to like them. And you might even recognize it's flattery, but you still respond to it. You may have people who give gifts and they're not so much genuine, but you still appreciate that. And so they're leveraging all of that back to themselves for what it is that they ultimately want. And I'm not a fan of that at all. My thinking when it comes to engaging that principle of reciprocity, that says people feel a natural obligation to give back when someone first gives to them. I always encourage people to approach it with a mindset that, the more people I help, whenever I do need help in return, there's more people who will want to help me. I don't give to pull this big lever to get you to do something, but I know that when I've given genuinely, I can come back and freely ask. And if you're the right person with the right skill set and you have the time, you'll probably want to help me. And we're both better off as a result of that.
All right, let's test it. Let's test it because you mentioned reciprocity. So we've kind of touched on liking and authority, a little bit on social proof. So those are three. Now you've said reciprocity. Let me ask you, good thinkers, ready for a question? When someone offers you something of value for free, maybe that's, to give your email address to download a free PDF, or someone hands you a rose at the airports, anything like that. How does it make you feel? And here are the choices. A, you're glad to accept it because, gosh darn it, you deserve it. Mm. B, you're glad to accept it and you're grateful. These are going to be hard. So you got to, C, you're glad to accept it and you're grateful, but you feel a little bit guilty as you search for a way to pay them back. Or D, you're suspicious that they want something. So A, you're just like, hey, I deserve this. B, you're, hey, thanks, I'm really grateful. C, I'm grateful, but I kind of feel like, ugh, I owe you something now. Or D, what are you trying to get me to do? Put it in the chat. And maybe Brian can explain how to use reciprocity so that it feels, I don't know, what's the optimal way from a persuasive perspective? What would be the most optimal way that people should feel? Because Jennifer says C and Jancy says D all day long. She's like, all right, what are you trying to get me to do? Jennifer says C, like, okay, I like this, but now I feel like I owe you something. What's the best way? And how do you use reciprocity to get people to feel A, B, C, or D, whichever is the best way?
Well, I think the best way when you give is to give something that has meaning to the other individual. So, if you're walking down a mall and somebody thrusts something into your hand, they don't know you. They don't know what you want, what you need, what you like. And so most likely it is a tactic to get you to respond in some way. And I'm not a fan of that at all. Now, if somebody engages you and you begin to have interaction with them, then absolutely you might find something that you could give. And I'll use my wife as an example. Jane used to make jewelry, and she'd go to open air markets and would sell her jewelry. And she was really intent on trying to use this psychology. And she said, let's take one thing today to focus on. And I said, okay, let's use reciprocity. Well, a mother and daughter came up, and the daughter's wearing a button. It says, I'm 18 today. So I'm like nudging my wife. I'm like, that's a perfect opportunity to give a gift. So she gave her this, handmade bookmark with different designs on it. And the mother was like, no, you don't have to do that. And Jane said, oh, come on, it's her 18th birthday. That was totally appropriate. I mean, they were interested in what she had. It was a natural time. She wasn't giving gifts to everybody who walked up to get them to buy. But when she found that appropriate, they ended up buying a lot of jewelry. The mother really appreciated what she did. That was very natural and genuine to the situation.
How do you take a product that you're trying to, okay, let's take another, let's say you're the product. Let's say you're out there, one of the millions of people out there trying to get a job. How could you use reciprocity? I mean, it seems like that's so far removed from applying online and trying to make connections on LinkedIn, or what would be some tactic that you could use right now to try to get a job using reciprocity?
Well, that's such a wide question in terms of, like you're saying, applying online. Am I having conversation? So I'm going to take it as let's say that we are having a conversation and I'm applying for a job at your company, Becky. I would have done research to find out what you're doing really well at, maybe where your struggles are. And if I had something I could genuinely offer you, and it doesn't have to be tangible, it could be intangible. So if your company was struggling, Becky, to in their marketing, and I had expertise in marketing, I might say, Becky, I was looking over your information, and I know part of the reason you're looking to fill this role is because of the marketing. You're struggling a little bit. I noticed on some of your advertising, and then maybe I'd share one or two things that I might do where you could go, that's really good. Now, you could take that and go use that. You may not end up hiring me, but I've given you something that could be genuinely beneficial to you and your organization. So it always comes back to, I need to do some homework. I need to understand the organization. I need to, if possible, understand the individual. And I think, what is it that I could say or do or give that might be perceived as genuinely beneficial and appreciated? And that might be something that sets me apart from some of the other candidates.
I see this on LinkedIn because when I have someone reach out to connect with me and they mention something specific about my course
Mhm.
or something specific about, oh, I saw an episode of the Good Thinking show, and then they want to connect with me, that I feel that reciprocity, I feel the pull.
Mhm.
And I imagine that if you were using LinkedIn as a job seeker and you were reaching out to someone, it might be worthwhile to Google and see what they've written. And if you can make a comment about something specific that you enjoyed and why you want to link in, or maybe you share that article before you ask them for an informational
Mhm.
interview or to see what kind of, if your services would be appropriate.
Yeah,
That seems like
absolutely.
that
You go.
I was just going to say that seems like reciprocity in action. This is a very valuable tool that is easy to dismiss because you think you're manipulating and you don't like that.
Yeah, giving a compliment is giving. And we all like, so that also taps into liking. That's one way that we can get people to like us. But when we also genuinely compliment somebody, we start thinking more highly of them. So when you're reaching out to connect with somebody on LinkedIn, if you can refer back to something that you've seen or read or heard that was positive, and you put that in your request to connect, you're far more likely to make a connection than the standard, I'd like to connect with you on LinkedIn. Um,
Absolutely.
I don't reject people if they put that in, but I will always ask, how did you find me? And most people will say, oh, I took your course on LinkedIn. I loved it. And I'm glad then that I connected with them, because those are people who liked something that I did. But I would encourage everybody who's listening to this, learn how to use the feature where you can put in a personalized message to give that person a reason that you wanted to connect. And if you can offer that compliment, by all means, genuinely do so.
I'd like to touch on, we may go a few minutes late. Let me know if you want to end right at the half hour or you want to go a few minutes late so that you can get each of these principles in your mind. So
We
end
can
on
go till
time.
tomorrow, Becky.
Leo and I could, and we start pouring scotch at 4 p.m. I'm going to use your time. I'm going to use your Columbus time, not my
Mhm.
Pacific Northwest time. All right. Next question. You ready? Ready,
Yep.
good thinkers? All right. Uh, how important is it for you to be consistent with your beliefs? Number one, you would say consistency is very important because I don't want to look flaky or like a flip flopper. Or two, consistency isn't important because I'm going to give you three options because I don't like mind letting other people influence my opinions. Or three, consistency isn't as important as showing that I can change my mind. Now, no cheating. If you've taken the critical thinking, you know one of the conditions. If you've taken the critical thinking course on LinkedIn, you know one of the conditions. So no cheating, but just your first gut reaction. I don't want to look like a flip flopper. Number one. Number two, I don't mind letting people influence me and showing that I'm influenceable. Or three, I like to show that I can change my mind, like in the face of reliable evidence. So Chris says, oh, we got to put this. Love Brian's ethical sincerity. Good choice for your presentation live. Yay. Thank you, Chris.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate that. And Brian, that is a liking compliment that is true, including also your shirt is really cute. And
Jane picked it
Jennifer,
out.
Jennifer says, Jennifer says, I think we should allow ourselves to grow and change. Yeah, I think that's true as well, but I'm
Mhm.
asking more like, what do you personally feel? Like you don't want to look like a flip flopper. We know what we should do because that's what to do. But what about how to think? So that's my question. I think she's right. I think Jennifer's spot on, but let's figure out. Now, let's see. Mariana says C. She wants to show that she is willing to change in the face of reliable evidence. Stephen says 3. And I can attest to Stephen. If I present him with reliable evidence, he doesn't. But there are some deeply held beliefs that are really entrenched, that are really hard to get people to
Yeah.
change their mind about. And Let's say hello. Syed says hello. All right. So you put in the chat which one. And Brian, how should we think about this principle of consistency? We don't want to look like a flip-flopper. We don't want to look wishy-washy. What do we do?
Well, so the principle of consistency says that we feel an internal psychological pressure, but also an external social pressure to be consistent in what we say and what we do. And we all feel this to one degree or another. And when I'm in front of an audience and I ask, have you ever given your word to somebody that you'd be somewhere to do something, and then you had to back out, and your reason was very legitimate and your friend understood, every hand goes up. We've all experienced that. And my next question is, how did you feel when you had to say, I'm sorry, I can't make it? And I hear words like awful, guilty, terrible, horrible, very heavy emotional words. And that just shows us that we do not generally feel good about ourselves when we say one thing and do another. But that doesn't mean that we should always do what we say, because sometimes we know in our gut that what we're being asked to do, even though somebody is aligning it with what we previously said or done, we just know it's not the right thing maybe. And we have to learn to set that aside and say, no, in this case, it's okay not to be consistent. It's completely okay that you feel a little bit bad when you aren't consistent, especially under certain circumstances. But it's also completely okay that you can say, you know what? I should be open enough to be influenced into a different direction if it makes sense. But I'm just warning everybody, it's hard to set that aside because what we think and believe, we ascribe to who we are. And so that becomes the challenge for us. But I think all three are very valid answers.
All right. Now, on the flip side, because we're going to go a little long, how do we think about using consistency? We know how we feel when we are. How do we think about using it as a persuasive tool? Now we're going to try to get someone again to, buy our product or give us a discount or, hire us or go on a date with us. How do we use consistency as a persuasive tool?
Well, and that is for me, or is that for the group? I wasn't sure on that, Becky.
Oh, good question. The group is putting in all of their chats. I'm pulling in, but
Okay.
let's ask you, because we need to get down to how do we use this? We don't want to leave today with not knowing how to use consistency.
Really, to be able to tap into consistency goes back to something that I've said a number of times already, and that is doing your homework, and that is understanding who it is that you're trying to persuade. What have they said in the past? What have they done? What do they believe? What do they value? And then authentically showing how whatever it is that you're asking aligns with that. That it's not some technique that I'm going to ask you 5 questions you have to say yes to, so I can then ask the big question at the end and you feel like you were squeezed into that. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about really getting to know and understand the person so that you can then step back and say, I really believe that what I'm going to be offering or asking would be beneficial for them. Now, how could I align what I'm going to say with what I've learned about their values, their beliefs, etc., to make it easier for them to see that, hey, maybe this is really going to be a good thing for me. That's, I believe, how we approach it, not the smarmy, I'm going to ask you the 5 questions just to get you to say yes approach.
It seems to me that with all of these principles, there is one underlying requirement, which is do your homework. You can't just jump into influencing people right away without at least starting with a little curiosity about that person. And otherwise, you're just like using these techniques as just, I just can't even imagine how they would work.
I steer away from using terms like tactics. When I used the term tactic earlier, it was very intentional because that's how some people approach it. We call them principles for a reason because they're guidelines for how people generally think and behave. And I think if we live a principled life where we're really trying to look out for the betterment of other people, then we step back and we try to understand them and we try to use these in ways to guide them into decisions that they would look back and say, you know what, Brian, at first I wasn't really sure, but I'm really glad that I made that decision. Thank you for helping me to make that decision. That's where we want to get to.
Great advice. As we wrap up our Good Thinking show, Saeed, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Everyone, Daenerys, I'm glad you're here. Matt, Jancy, Stephen, Jennifer, if I missed you in the scroll, I apologize. Brian, this has been so not just theoretical, but practical. And that's what I love, because so much of the theory, this is what you think. Now it's how to think about this. And that's the marination of digging beneath the surface. And that's the whole idea behind good thinking. How, I just hit my microphone, I'm going to get in trouble. How should people get a hold of you if they want more of your incredibleness?
Well, probably the two best ways. They can visit my website, which is influencepeople.biz. And there's all kinds of free resources. I've been on almost 100 podcast videos, the blog, things like that. They can also see links to the book. They can contact me through the website, but of course, LinkedIn. So if any of you reach out to me to connect on LinkedIn and you don't put in a message like, hey, I was on the Good Thinking episode where you and Becky were talking, I guarantee you, as sure as I'm sitting here, I will send a response and say, how did you find me? I also think that's a good way to keep social media social. We get a little interaction. I'm not just somebody who's checking a box. Oh, I got another follower or connection. So please do put a reason. And I will even respond to that too.
Okay, you can, this has been so great, and I hope that all of you will become regular parts of Good Thinking, regular Good Thinkers. We are streaming live on LinkedIn Live and on YouTube Live at Becky Saltzman, very fancy YouTube channel name. But go ahead and subscribe, and if you want notifications for the show, you can hit that bell. LinkedIn is getting increasingly good with the notification potential, but so you can definitely subscribe on LinkedIn, but if you follow on LinkedIn, but YouTube is a little easier. And just to give yourself a little bit of time each week to spend on thinking and improving how we think. Thank you, Brian. You have been a joy. You're even fun without cocktails.
It was my pleasure, Becky. I'm glad that we met all those years ago and that we have the relationship that we do.
Likewise. Thanks, guys. Have a great week.
Bye, everybody.